Hello, everybody, and good afternoon, maybe good morning, depending on where in the world you are. We have more than 100 participants from 16 different countries at this webinar. Here in Scandinavia, it's 1 o'clock, and I would like to welcome you all to this mini webinar. My name is Ole Mortensen. I work at CFD in Denmark, and I am also part of the planning committee behind the Nordic Conference. As you probably know, we should have met in Finland during this week, but there was a pandemic that put a stop to that. However, we hope to see you all this time next year in Finland, but you will hear more about that conference at the end of our webinar today. Still in the planning committee, we had already started the planning of the conference, and we still felt that there is a constant need for inspiration and for new visions on the future. So we are very excited today to be able to present to you 3 of our keynote speakers who will give you a small taste of what they will be talking about next year, but who will also make a presentation then that in itself will hopefully provide you with some knowledge, some inspiration for your actions tomorrow. With that being said, I would like to welcome you all on behalf of the planning committee, welcome you all to this mini webinar, and I will now give the digital floor to Maria Kreutz, who is a senior advisor on deafblindness at the Nordic Welfare Center. The Nordic Welfare Center, who is the main organization behind this conference. So, Maria, welcome.
Thank you, Ole, and thank you for this introduction. Now it means that I have got a little more time than I had due to the program, and that's good because when I've tested my speech, it was a bit longer, so thank you for that. And welcome from me as well to all of you. It's so nice that you have chosen to participate to this webinar, this teaser, together with us today. So I have the honor to say something about Nordic cooperation and give a brief introduction to the theme. And why is that? As Ole said, my name is Maria Kreutz and I work at Nordic Welfare Center. I am a senior advisor and the project manager for the deafblind issues at Nordic Welfare Center. And as maybe some of you know, we have had many webinars during this last year, so maybe we have met, but I don't know it. The Nordic Welfare Center is the base for the Nordic cooperation within deafblind issues and among other topics as well in welfare issues. So, of course, that's why, sorry, that's one of the reasons why I have a slot in this program to say something about Nordic cooperation. Before I started to work at Nordic Welfare Center, I worked in a Swedish organization who provide services to people with mostly congenital deafblindness. And I've been working there for 27 years. And that's not important in one way, but in this context, it means something because I have followed some of the development in this Nordic cooperation, and it has meant a lot to me. And it's very interesting to follow it, to see how it moves and how it grows as well, and how it's very important, and you can see it when you follow it nearby. In addition to that, a young man in my family member has congenital deafblindness. So I also have the perspective on a personal level, and that has really enriched me. And that in a way, because it has been so clear for me and so important that we need to collaborate, professionals and families, people with the deaf blindness, and all together, because otherwise we cannot develop knowledge, we cannot go forward in a proper way if we not cooperate together, all of us. So that's something why it's my turn to say, to tell you something about the Nordic cooperation. And I will start with something about yesterday, or how everything started. Yesterday, I'm quite sure that the Nordic cooperation did not start in the mid-ages, and this is a picture from a town somewhere in the mid-ages, not connected to Nordic cooperation on deaf blindness. But in the 70s, however, it started when some professionals met, and they were working in fields with vision impairment or hearing loss. And then they met partly children, pupils. Then they found out that there is something more, because some of them have vision impairment, and then they have some hearing loss, and what to do then, because then they couldn't use their knowledge that they were familiar with, or the methods, and so on. And I know that Paul Hart will say many more things about this and go deeper in it in his presentation. So I just say briefly, that was when it started in the 70s in the Nordic area. And then it was put up also on the political level, because they really wanted to do something about it. And they understood that we need another knowledge that we already have. So it was put up on a social political action on a population level. And then each country in the Nordic area was too small to do it by themselves. So they decided to gather and have something together. And then the Nordic Council of Ministers was funding a project just to start with it. And the question was, is this something to work and cooperate about? And they found out, well, it's very important that we do this thing together. So the knowledge development started, and in the 80s, in the middle 80s, they were working with a Nordic definition on deaf blindness. And this Nordic definition on deaf blindness is the baseline for the Nordic cooperation, is the ground, and that everything starts and where we can work forward from that baseline. It was adjusted in 2016, so this is the latest version, and I'm sure we will adjust it in the future again, and it's adjusted to the ICF, International Classification of Function and Disability and Health. I will just read this. I'm sure that many of you out there know everything about the Nordic definition, but maybe not everyone. Deaf blindness is a combined vision and hearing impairment of such severity that it is hard for the impaired senses to compensate for each other. Thus, deaf blindness is a distinct disability. And that sentence is very important. It is a distinct disability. You need to have special knowledge among many things around this distinct disability. I'm not going any deeper in the definition for now. You can find the definition on our website in English. And I am sure that at the conference in Tampere next year, there will be at least one workshop on the definition. So the Nordic cooperation today, what does it look like? We have 5 networks within Nordic Welfare Center. We coordinate those networks, and the networks have different topics, different themes that they are working within. And the members are researchers and practitioner, I should say. Researchers and practitioners. And they work closely to the people who have deaf blindness themselves. Some of the networks are more into research, and they are also the purpose for the network is to collect knowledge, to develop the knowledge, and to spread it. We have also projects, and they are limited for 2 or 3 years within different topics. Especially we need to highlight something, and then we get together in a project group and work with the theme for some years. And for now, we have this project on identification. And I assume that many of you participated on the conference from Norway about identification and definition on deaf blindness. You can find more about that conference on StartPed's website, and also find the part 2 of that conference in November. As I mentioned, we have courses and webinars, mostly webinars now, but I hope that in the end of the year we can open for courses again, and you can find all the webinars. They are recorded, and you can find them on our website. So if you missed them, don't be sad. You have the chance to look at them whenever you are able to. Nordic Welfare Center is a board member of DBI as well, and DBI arrange international conferences, and that leads us into conferences in the Nordic area. Here, oh, and I forgot to say, I'm so sorry. This is a picture with flags from all the Nordic countries, and Greenland, the Faroe Islands, Åland, and Sápmi as well. And the next picture, it's from a conference arranged by Deafblind International. And you see the back of many people and some tactile interpretation. The international conferences used to be every 4th year, and then there are regional conferences, and then we used to have a Nordic conference every 4th year as well. So we should have it now this year. Today I should stand in Tampere, but here I am instead. We postponed it to next year so we can start the countdown today. You can find the link on our website, so you can register for information when it will be open for application for a workshop. And I really hope that many of you want to share your experiences at that conference. And why do we have it in English then? Because we want to reach out to more people. That's the easiest answer. And especially when we have it in this digital way, but we have decided to have the conference in Tampere in English as well. So then we can get together so many more of us in a much easier way. And there is something else why we choose to have the conference in Tampere. So here it's a photo of a very happy young girl. She's holding up her hands in the air with confetti. Kuurosokeat, the Finnish Deafblind Association, had their 50 years anniversary this year. We really want to say congratulations to you, but we will celebrate it in a more proper way next year when we visit Tampere. It's very important for us to have this conference in Tampere to really make a statement, a mark that the importance of this very long work that the Finnish Association have done in Finland together with people with deaf blindness. But we will come back to you, Kuurosokeat, and celebrate you in a proper way next year, I promise. So the theme, today's knowledge for tomorrow's action. I know that Paul Hart will come back to that as well, and he has been elaborating a bit with the words and the sentence, and I was thinking the same. So I'm so glad that saw his PowerPoint before, because then I have to adjust my speech a bit, but then I felt secure as well that, oh, if Dr. Paul Hart thinking this way, then I'm not totally wrong. He will tell you more about that later on. Today we are going to listen to three quite different keynote speakers. They are talking on different themes, but they have one thing in common, and that is to reach the goal of a good quality of life. And I think that's very important. That's the main thing for this conference. Today's knowledge for tomorrow's action, it has challenges. And I think that it's very important to raise that as well. I said earlier that the networks, the member is from the research field and they are practitioners, but I know it from both in my work at Nordic Welfare Center from earlier and within my family, the experiences in family life, that the knowledge and the research doesn't always reach out to the people with deaf blindness, the people who we should give the settings to have quality of life with knowledge and so on. And that it's a gap between research and reaching out the knowledge all the way out. And I think that is very, very important to think about and maybe to talk about on the conference next year. But of course, there are strengths as well, and that is the togetherness, that we are working together, that we are sharing experience, and that we are willing to see what is tomorrow, what can we do to reach out with the knowledge. So with that said, let us go together on our way to Tampere next year, but also in a wider perspective, to work together, to cooperate together, to find each other and to share experience. Thank you so much. And now, Ole, what is happening now?
Now I have the great pleasure of presenting to you the first speaker. The first presentation will take its starting point in exactly what Maria was talking about now, the conference theme, today's knowledge for tomorrow's action. And I'm very happy that we have Dr. Paul Hart, who is head of research and practice at SEND Scotland. He will join us now, and he will share some of his thoughts and show some examples of the relationship between theory and practice, between knowledge and action. So Paul, welcome.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to check that my presentation is showing and you can all hear me okay. Excellent. Yes. Yep. Well, thank you to Ola for the introduction, and also to the planning committee for this mini digital conference for the invitation to come and speak with you today. So I'm going to cover some areas around the links between practice and theory and how that balance has sometimes played out in our field over the years. And I'm going to consider ways in which knowledge has emerged in the field of deaf blindness, because in comparison perhaps to some other educational or social care fields, ours is a relatively recent field, but one which is nevertheless rich in theoretical and practical knowledge. It may also be a frustrating presentation at times for you, particularly by the end, because a number of ideas are probably going to float out over the next 30 minutes, but we will not be able to follow all of those ideas today, and we might not even know if some of them are good ideas or not so good ideas. However, most of those ideas will land in Finland next year, I am sure. So if you want to continue to follow their journey, then you know where you need to be in 2022. So in many respects, our field really began to develop solid foundations, both in relation to theory and practice, throughout the 1960s and 1970s in response to the major rubella epidemics all across the world. There were larger populations of people with deafblindness and a consequent growing need for educational support. And in 1976, the International Association for the Education of the Deafblind, the IAEDB, brought together leading practitioners from across the world to share ideas and common thinking. And these practitioners were working in what have now become famous centres across the world, where pioneering specialist support and educational provision were developing. We had Perkins School in Boston, St. Michael's Gestel in the Netherlands, early services established by the Canadian Deafblind and Rubella Association, SENS, our colleagues in England. So there were specialist centres all across the world. And Maria has already given some idea that in the 1970s, services and practice and theory began to bubble away in the Nordic countries. And sometimes these centres grew out of services for people with visual impairment, and sometimes those services grew out of previous services for people with hearing impairment. And this probably coloured some of the early developments in practice. Subsequently, that association for the education of the deafblind grew into Deafblind International, and it's moved well beyond simply thinking about education, and instead it considers the fullest range of deafblindness, both congenital and acquired. But of course, we all know that there's a much longer history than just the last 60 years. And our knowledge and understanding of deafblindness has been inspired by famous people in our field, people such as Laura Bridgman and Helen Keller in the USA, Ragnhild Kata in Norway, Marie Hurtin in France, Olga Skorakadova in Russia, and of course our very own James Mitchell here in Scotland. But I'll say more about him later on in the presentation. And there is a huge amount of description about the lives of each of these people, but I want to explore to what extent has this long history left a sound theoretical or practice foundation when the field began to develop more fully and more widely from the 1960s and 70s. And the answer to that is probably a mixed one. Of course, there are really rich accounts of the approaches used in Perkins School from the head teacher Samuel Gridley Howe, and his approaches and methods are even well documented by Charles Dickens, who visited America in the 1840s and wrote a journal called American Notes, and that gives pretty detailed accounts of the teaching methods in the school that were being employed to support Laura Bridgman. And of course, that book, maybe around 40 years after it was written, it was discovered by the parents of Helen Keller, and it gave them hope that their daughter might be teachable and indeed a place where they could go for some support. And I had the pleasure of visiting Perkins School, and on one visit there, I came across a series of articles and lectures from people who'd visited Perkins School throughout the 1970s and 1980s, and they left behind a series of talks and also articles that had appeared in some journals, and they detail a fascinating history of the methods developed and pioneered in the school beyond the time of Bridgman and Keller. The librarian who was in Perkins that day I visited was very kind to make me a copy of some of those presentations. And there's also some details of presentations from a gathering of educators at a conference held in England in 1962. So going back quite a long way. And we can see in these articles and lectures that practice did look to Piaget and Vygotsky and others for theoretical foundations of their work. And I'll explore some of that in a few minutes. So the success stories of Kata and Hurtin and Mitchell, they're detailed also, but some people have dismissed them as cases on which to build subsequent practice, since they have been described as isolated cases, thought of as miracles, manifestations of rare inborn gifts. And of course, if there were isolated cases, then either it wasn't thought possible to replicate their successes with others, or educators attempted to apply educational methods that had been suited to these famous cases. And you all, of course, will know that many of those famous cases had sight and hearing in the early part of their childhoods. Of course, today we can see a real value in using single case studies as a really helpful research methodology, but that's another topic for Finland. So when we look back over this long history, what is the balance between theory and practice? And as we begin to explore that, I want to throw in two ideas at this stage. I'm going to take the second one that's on the screen first. And this is this lovely quotation from 1968 from a writer, Saussure, who says, "To practice without theory is to sail an uncharted sea, but theory without practice is not to set sail at all." And that resonates, I think, with some of the ideas that were described by Professor Marlene Jansen from the University of Groningen a few years ago at a Deafblind International Conference, where she highlighted that in most cases, people are looking for evidence-based practice. And she highlighted that perhaps in our field, we are really strong on practice-based evidence. And that's what led to the rethinking by Maria and myself of a slightly different way to understand today's title. Today's knowledge for tomorrow's actions. If we think of practice-based evidence, then we can imagine that we have tomorrow's knowledge being actioned today very often in the field of deaf blindness. And of course, that brings some tremendous advantages, but it also brings some real disadvantages. And I always remember discussing, my brother is a researcher in the field of biochemistry, and he speaks regularly at scientific conferences. And the ideas that emerge at these conferences and maybe appear in journals, then some of these ideas, they won't become practice ideas. They won't be influencing the day-to-day work that goes on in the scientific field today. It might be years before these theoretical ideas settle and become practice. In contrast, At a DBI conference, if you go and you listen to a speaker talking about new ideas, new thinking, new theoretical models, then you may be sitting in the audience one Monday hearing all of that, and the next Monday you're likely trying out all of those new theories in your very own centre. And as I said, that can sometimes be advantageous, but it can sometimes be really problematic. And just a very simple example from Sense Scotland. We had the honour of having Dr. Jan van Dijk come to visit us many years ago. And he taught us, amongst other things, about tactile calendars. And we really implemented these with great enthusiasm. But we probably didn't read to the end of his publications, or we didn't really understand exactly what he was thinking. And when we introduced these tactile calendars, it was without it really being part of a conversation. It was more about telling somebody what's happening now and what's happening next. In many years later, in the 1990s, we learned about research from the field of autism, which helps to understand the differences between imperative and declarative communication, with one fostering real social and vocabulary development, and one kind of leading up a cul-de-sac, a language cul-de-sac. We were helping the people we supported to visit that cul-de-sac and not really open up their world. So a bit of knowledge is sometimes a bit dangerous. So when we're thinking about Jan van Dijk, we might think that he is very often, when he was writing in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and well beyond, then there were aspects of his work that were really ahead of theory. And there was a paper written a few years ago by some neuroscientists which helped make sense of some of Van Dijk's thinking from a neuroscientific point of view now, but Van Dijk was doing this as something he felt really worked with the children and young people he was supporting. So his work is really coloured by the ideas of communication and movement being linked, and developing this concept of coactivity. It was about meaning making. It was about planning and sequencing for sure, but it had to be built into conversations that happen between people, and it's about everyday activities. In Canada, we had the work of John McGuinness and his wife, Jackie Trefry. They spoke about interdependence. So not this idea that we should be supporting deafblind people to become independent in the world, but we need to recognize that all of us are independent and rely on other people. In more recent years, the field of deafblindness has looked at the dialogical framework and looked at issues around partnership, but we can look at John's writings from the 70s and see that he was talking about exactly the same thing. John and Jackie also taught us to avoid deficit models. They pioneered the idea of intervention or interveners. And in many ways, the intervention program that's still very prevalent in Canada was a forerunner of person-centered thinking, which is now all across the world. And then we have some really super work that's described by a psychologist from Russia, Mesheryakov, who writes about the work that happened in Russia in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and Mesheryakov was one of the early pioneers who came to England in 1962 to work with other practitioners across the world. And one of the things that he helps us to see, and this is a long quotation from one of his publications, unfortunately. It's he's really exposing the fallacy of the anti-Marxist claim that it is the mastery of words that renders man human, and that the miraculous intervention of speech can itself bring to life human consciousness. But he goes on to say that words can only assume their full significance and play their vital role in a child's intellectual activity if they serve to accumulate his experience in a sensory and object-orientated activity and in meaningful conversations with others around him. So again, I think he was pushing at some things that we now understand more greatly by looking at theory. So some of the things that are better understood by theory. One of the DBI, Deafblind International Networks, is the communication network, and it, in its early work, began to talk about something they call the Little Black Book. And this is a picture of the said Little Black Book. It was a book about new perspectives in early communicative development, written by a French and an Italian psychologist, Jacqueline Adele and Luigi Camaglione. And in their book, which was really it really changed some practice and some thinking in the field of developmental psychology. And it spoke about the early interactions, about imitation, about how to build up communication, turn-taking, reciprocity, etc., etc. And that book helped describe many of the things that were happening in schools across the world in relation to deafblindness, and gave a real focus on the early communication developments. There's been work from the field of autism and sensory impairment. There are many linguists who are now involved in our field, and there's a whole body of research about embodied cognition. Again, we will explore that more fully in Finland next year. And we know now that there is a huge effort in the field of deafblindness to drive practice from first-class research. There are many masters and PhD courses right across the world, some based in Europe, some in the States, some in South America. There are many courses developing. We're learning much, much more about tactile communication and language, and I'll come back to that maybe in some of the questions and answers. We know that there are many DBI networks and the kind of networks that Maria described. So I just want to end by going back to think about two men who are written about in Scotland from the late 18th and early 19th century. One is David Gilbert Tate, and he pops up in a book written by a geologist who went to visit the island of Shetland, and he came across David Gilbert Tate, who was a young deafblind man, and he describes his situation. But one of the things he describes is how music and rhythm really supported this young man. But that's perhaps knowledge that was then lost in Scotland for a good few hundred years. We have James Mitchell, and he lived to a very old age, and he became the subject of much philosophical debate across Europe, and had letters written between philosophers, between doctors, and people were trying to answer a famous question in the field of philosophy called Molyneux's question. And if I will just briefly explain what the question is and then leave you to ponder it before we come back to it next year. In brief, the question that the 17th century philosopher was asking was, if a man who had been born blind and who's learnt to distinguish and name a sphere and a cube by touch, If his vision suddenly came back, would he be able to distinguish and name these objects simply by sight? And James Mitchell and David Gilbert Tate were then subject to much discussion across the philosophy and philosophers of Europe. And there are many ideas about practice that we probably forgot in our field, but actually now we understand in different terms and can really push the way forward. So I will wrap up my presentation there, and I think we can take some questions from anyone, any of the participants, and briefly carry on this discussion. Thank you, Ola.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Paul. You make it very hard for us to wait a whole year for the continuation of this. This was really, really interesting. There are a couple of questions. They're not easy, but I think that you will be able to at least begin answering them. One is, when we talk about evidence-based practice, what do you see as the main obstacle for implementing research into practice?
I think one of the obstacles in the field of deafblindness has been the small numbers of people and bringing together ideas from across the world. So if you were doing research in science or research in general populations or even research in the field of autism, there are perhaps hundreds and thousands of people that you can have as participants in your studies, and you can apply learning across broad groups of people. I don't think that's so possible in deafblindness, and I think the limited numbers of people in any one country mean that no research answer will be found in one country. We have to seek collaborations across the world to answer some of the questions we have. I don't know if that's a good answer.
I think it was a very good answer. There's another question. Have you in any way changed your own way of thinking about this topic, the correlation between theory and practice during the years where you have been part of different networks and research on deafblindness?
Yes, I have. I didn't start out in this field as a researcher. I started more as someone involved in practice. I did a lot of work in some of my early years in the field around using music to develop communication and to develop a sense of well-being and identity in these partnerships. But I didn't really understand the theoretical basis on why that was working. I just knew that I had a nice time, the people I was supporting had a nice time, and we developed all sorts of exciting things together. In more recent years, a whole group of developmental psychologists have written about something they call communicative musicality, which is one way of describing those early interactions that happen between babies and caregivers, even in the first minutes of life. And when we look back now at some of those videos from many, many years ago, we can think, gosh, that's what's happening. We're really helping that a solid foundation of communication to develop. But I wouldn't have known the theoretical basis for that. I hadn't read The Little Black Book by then. I'd never heard of Anna Nafstadt or Inga Rodbro or Jacques Souriau, Marlene Janssen. I hadn't heard of any of these people then. But when I did hear of them and read it, that explains why some of the things we've been doing work. I've probably also changed my mind or developed a wider thinking that sometimes, as I gave with one very small example with the Van Dyke, I think there are sometimes practices that come into our field and we don't really know what the longer term impact of those educational practices will be. There was a school in Scotland, because the principal staff there had been taught in Perkins School for the Blind, and there was a good link there, but some of the sign language that was used in the school, it would have been well suited to downtown Boston, but didn't work so well when the children left school to take their place in Glasgow. That's now all been resolved and changed and developed. So I think we need research on what are the longer term implications of some practices.
Great, thank you for that answer. We have a comment from Finland, from Rita Latinen and Ross Palmer, who thank you very much, and because it gave them a lot of lovely memories from the late 80s and 90s.
Yes.
But there is another question here, or maybe not a question, but a comment. You seemed to stop yourself. You were talking about something about tactile something, and then you said, well, you don't have time for that, but maybe we can come back to that. So could you please elaborate on that?
Actually, it's timely that Rita and Russ have said hello via the chat, because one of the things I was going to say is that I think one of the really exciting areas in the future for developing practice is both linking theory and practice, but also linking the experiences of people, what we've learned from the field of acquired deafblindness in terms of the development of what we could see as a natural tactile sign language. And I think the work that Rita and Russ and others have done in Europe around social haptic communication, and the work that's going on in the States around pro-tactile communication, I think that's helping us to see that a tactile language, a fully natural tactile language, might be as far removed from a visual sign language as a visual sign language is from spoken language. And I think that can only happen if we learn from the fields of acquired and congenital deafblindness, but learn directly from deafblind people themselves. Because when I look at the work that Russ and Rita have done, and others, and the pro-tactile in America, then there are ways of tactile communication developing it's really, yeah, it's just a very different experience than just adapting a visual sign language. And I think that is a really exciting future for our field.
Thank you very much, Paul. And as I said, I think there are lots of us who are really looking forward to hearing you talk about this topic more in about a year, and probably many of us who would like to grab hold of you and discuss this further over a cup of coffee or a beer or something like that. So be prepared for that. Thank you very much, Paul, for this presentation and for your answers. We have come to the point in the program where we will have a short break now, break until 2 o'clock. And during the break, we will show you a short video presenting the different members of the planning committee. We thought that might be interesting for you to see who is behind the planning of this small webinar, but of course also behind the planning of the conference next year. So we will run the video and we will have a break and be back here at 2 o'clock.
Hi there, my name is Rolf. I am an audiologist and I work at Eicholt National Center for the Deafblind here in Norway. I am an audiologist, I work with hearing rehabilitation, and I am also a hearing aid user and have been so since I was about 5 years old. In addition to working directly with people with combined sensory losses here, I also do a lot of social media work, photo, videos, as well as other related projects here in Eicholt. Participating in this scientific committee has been great. It's been a brand new experience for me, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it all come together in Tampere, Finland, and I'm really glad we're going to Finland this year. My superpower would probably be the fantastic ability to remember every single embarrassing thing I've ever said and done. in my life.
Hi, my name is Maria Kreutz and I'm working at the Nordic Welfare Center with deafblind issues. That means that I coordinate networks and projects with professionals who develop and increase knowledge on deafblindness. We also arrange courses and webinars to spread the knowledge, to reach out and hopefully make a difference. I have had the opportunity to participate to many conferences during the years, and it has really meant a lot to me. Of course, with the knowledge I have received, but maybe even more to meet so many nice people. Some of them are now my colleagues, and some of them are also my friends. In my family, a member has congenital deafblindness, so I also have the perspective on deafblindness on a personal level. I really hope to meet all of you next year in Tammerfors on the Nordic Conference on Deafblindness. Welcome.
Oh, hello. Have you been here long? Sorry, I didn't hear you come in. Welcome to my office. My name is Ole Mortensen. I work at CFD in Denmark. I'm really glad to be part of this scientific committee behind the Nordic Conference. And I think that there are a number of very relevant and interesting topics in the field of deafblindness at the moment. But I think that, to me, the most important and the most central one is technology. How do we make sure that people with deafblindness benefit from technology? I think, to me, that is probably the most crucial question. And I look forward to exploring that question at the conference next year. I hope to see you all there.
Hi, my name is Helle Buhlund Selling and I work as a development consultant at the area for communication and special education in Aalborg, Denmark. I work with development on a lot of different platforms: staff development, co-creation of new knowledge, knowledge spreading, and I love to bring practice and research into play when we together investigate how to provide the best service for people with deafblindness. The Nordic cooperation is essential for my work as a development consultant. One can say that through the Nordic cooperation under NVC, the quality of our educational programs in Denmark is validated. I really look forward to the Nordic Conference in Tampere next September. And when I think of the title, Today's Knowledge for Tomorrow's Actions, I think of mutual inspiration, knowledge sharing, co-creation, networking, and sharing experiences with new and old friends. So see you in Tampere next year.
Hello, I'm Risto Hoikkanen, Director at Finnish Deafblind Association. My special knowledge area is produce services for deafblind people. Some hobbies: beekeeping, honeybees and sweet honey, smoke sauna, and growing own garlic. Well, the Finnish Deafblind Association is leading deafblindness expert in Finland. Association is celebrating 50 years from 1971 to 2021. Great milestone. In Finland exists 1,000 deafblind. Our association has 440 members. Today we have 100 employees and a lot of ongoing activities. Deafblind human rights directive are working. Also, association provide a lot of services to deafblind people, like housing services, rehabilitation, consultant services, IT education, some supports and help desk. Our slogan of this year: meeting each other face to face. It was important in 1971 and also today.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. So now we change our topic, and next topic is human rights. The formal history of human rights begins in 1948 with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And over the years, we've seen a growing focus on the importance of participation, independence, and human rights for everyone, also people with special needs like people with deafblindness. In 1993, we saw the United Nations Standard Rules on the Equalization of Opportunities for People with Disabilities. In 2006, we saw the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. But like we just discussed in our last presentation, or that Paul discussed, knowledge is of no use unless it's put into practice. The same goes for rules and conventions. They are of no use if they are not put into action. And that is the title of the next presentation, Human Rights from Declarations to Real Action. And the presenter is Riku Virtanen from Finland. He is a researcher at the Åbo Academy University in Finland. And he is also a European regional representative in the World Federation of the Deafblind. Riku Virtanen will present his thoughts in a video, recorded video, but he is present here at the webinar, and he will answer your questions after the video. So please submit your questions in the chat during the video, and then we'll get back to those.
Arvoisat webinaarin osanottajat, kiitos kutsusta tähän webinaariin. Kuten me kaikki tiedämme, nyt korona-aikana matkustaminen on hyvin vaikeaa. Minä unelmoin matkusta. Muistelen vuotta 2005. Olin pyörätuolissa istuvien ystävieni kanssa lentokentällä. Kenttävirkailija tuli luoksemme. Hän tiedusteli, missä on hoitajamme. Olimme hänelle potilaita. Me olimme objekteja. Seuraavana vuonna tapahtui suuri muutos. YK:n CRPD hyväksyttiin New Yorkissa. Nyt me korsokeat olemme subjekteja. Se oli totta teoriassa. Käytännössä muutos oli vasta alkanut. Paljon työtä tarvitaan, että käytäntö muuttuu. Tänään puhun teille 3 käsitteestä. Ne ovat osallistuminen, tietoisuus ja ennakkoluulot. Ensin puhun tietoisuuden lisäämisestä. Valtiolla on velvollisuus lisätä tietoa. Esimerkkini on apuvälineet. Tarvitsemme koulutusta niiden käyttöön. Myös henkilökunnan koulutus on tärkeää. Esimerkiksi monella korsokealla on sisäkorvaimplantti. Mitä tehdä, kun lapsella implantin akku loppuu kesken koulupäivän? Kukaan koulussa ei osaa vaihtaa akkua. Patterit ovat repussa koko päivän. Tärkeä keino lisätä tietoa on vertaistuki. Minulle iso asia oli vertaistuki. Olin 15-vuotias. Tapasin muita korsokeita Tampereella. Minä opin heiltä paljon eri taitoja. Myöhemmin toimin itse vertaistukena muille. Erityisesti tietoa tarvitaan kohtuullisesta mukautuksesta. Maailma muuttuu enemmän digitaaliseksi. EU vaatii, että nettisivut ovat saavutettavia. Monet nettipalvelut eivät ole kuitenkaan säilytettäviä. Minä tarvitsen toisen ihmisen apua, jotta voin käyttää nettipankkia. Lisäämällä tietoa saavutettavuudesta palveluita voidaan parantaa. Seuraava käsitteeni tänään on osallistuminen. Lapsilla on oikeus käydä kouluun. Koulu opettaa kirjallisia ja sosiaalisia. Koulu opettaa lapselle kirjallisia ja sosiaalisia taitoja. Kuurosokealle lapselle on tarjolla tukea. Saatavilla on avustajia, tulkkeja ja apuvälineitä. Ne auttavat hankkimaan kirjalliset taidot. Tarvitseeko lapsi myös sosiaaliset taidot? Kun minä olin koulussa, minä rakastin kirjoja. Olin aina yksin. En osannut olla muiden lasten kanssa koulussa. Sosiaaliset taidot olivat haaste minulle. Sitten puhun oikeudesta olla itsenäinen. Osa kuurosokeista ihmisistä on aktiivisia osallistujia. Kuurosokeilla on oikeus itse osallistua. On tärkeää, että me itse osallistumme. Osallistumalla olemme subjekteja. Kaikkialla maailmassa näin ei ole. Valitettavasti kaikki kuurosokeat eivät ole aktiivisia. Olen tavannut kuurosokeita eri maissa. Annan teille 2 esimerkkiä. Meille Etelä-Korea edustaa huipputeknologiaa. Kaikki tiedämme Samsungin puhelimet. Mutta entäs kuurosokeiden tulkkipalvelu Koreassa? Etsin tietoa internetistä. Kuurosokeiden tulkkipalvelusta Koreassa. Haku näyttää, että tietoa ei ole saatavilla tulkkipalvelusta Koreassa. Minä tapasin kuurosokean miehen Etelä-Koreasta. Kun keskustelin hänen kanssaan, minä huomasin, että hänen tulkkinsa oli aktiivinen osallistuja. Kuurosokea mies oli passiivinen osallistuja. Toinen esimerkkini on Etiopiasta. Olin mukana kehitysprojektissa. Projektin tarkoituksena oli tukea Etiopian kuurosokeiden yhdistystä. Suunnittelukokouksessa oli etiopialainen tulkki ja paikallisen kuurosokeiden yhdistyksen puheenjohtaja. Kokous kesti monta tuntia. Tulkki vastasi kaikkiin kysymyksiin puheenjohtajan puolesta. Kuurosokean puheenjohtaja istui tulkin vieressä. Kun kokous päättyi, tulkki herätti nukkuvan puheenjohtajan. 3. ja viimeinen käsite on tänään ennakkoluulot. Ennakkoluulot ovat suuri haaste. Kuurosokeilla ihmisillä on oikeus liikkua itsenäisesti. Kerron esimerkin. Minulle myönnettiin opaskoiraan oikeus vuonna 2006. Sopiva koira löytyi 5 vuodessa. Suomessa ei ollut aiemmin myönnetty opaskoiraa kuurosokealle ihmiselle. Siksi koirakoulun johtaja oli epävarma. Hän ilmoitti minulle, ettei tule koiraa. Sanoin, että katsotaan, onko peikkoja metsässä. Johtaja muutti mielipiteensä. Sain opaskoiran 2011. Kun me voitamme ennakkoluulot, itsenäinen liikkuminen on mahdollista. Kuurosokeilla ihmisillä on myös oikeus työhön. Ennakkoluudot ovat usein haaste. Minä hain töitä. Minä en saanut töitä, kun en näe ja kuule. Kursakea ihminen voi olla aluesihteeri. Hänellä on tulkkipalvelu ja tekniikka. Kuitenkin asiakkaat haluavat näkevän ja kuulevan. Kursakea voi olla ATK-tuki. Asiakkaat haluavat näkevän ja kuulevan. Kursakea voi olla myös lakimies. Haluavatko asiakkaat näkevän ja kuulevan lakimiehen? Julistukset ja sopimukset ovat alku. Ne eivät muuta todellisuutta. Me itse voimme muuttaa yhteiskuntaa. Me voimme tuntea oikeutemme. Me voimme osallistua yhdenvertaisesti muiden kanssa. Työoikeuksien vuoksi jatkuu. Olen kotoisin Tampereen maaseudulta. Kaunis järvien keskellä oleva Tampere odottaa. Nähdään Tampereella ensi vuonna. Kiitoksia huomiosta.
Thank you very much, Riku. Very interesting presentation. We have a number of questions, so I hope you are ready for that. First off, there's a question regarding the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. What do you see as the main obstacle for implementing the convention?
Raha on harvoin ongelma.
Money is rarely the problem there.
So did you say money is rarely the problem?
Ajattelen näin, koska monissa maissa
That's what I said, and that's what I think.
laki on ihan kunnossa.
Because in a lot of countries, the law, the legislation is okay,
Mutta
and there is
siitä ei
money,
toimi.
but yet it's not functioning.
Kursakijat, heitä on niin vähän, heitä priorisoidaan harvoin yhteiskunnassa.
The deafblind are there are such a limited number of deafblind people that they are rarely prioritized in the society.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that answer. Another question is, can you give an example of where you, as a person with deafblindness, has felt free and felt that you could participate fully?
Sakissa
When I played chess,
tuntuu myöskin, että viinimaistelu, se sopii kursakille,
chess and wine tasting, they really go well for the deafblind,
mikä on minun harrastukseni.
and they are my hobbies.
Yeah, they are my hobbies too. We have several participants who thank you for sharing your expertise and your experiences. Many of them actually. There is one question that you have visited and you have met many people with deafblindness from different countries around the world. Could you say which country do you think has the best services for people with deafblindness when it comes to human rights and equal opportunities?
Itse nähnyt niin monta maata.
I've seen a lot of countries,
Todella vaikea sanoa.
so it's really difficult to say just one.
Tavallaan jossain suhteessa palveluita, jos ajatellaan Skandinavian maissa.
When you consider services, the Scandinavia is quite advanced.
Mutta ovatko kursakijat ihmiset Pohjoismaissa onnellisempia kuin muualla?
But
Sanoisin, että eivät välttämättä.
But if you consider it in terms of happiness, I wonder if the people, the deafblind people of Scandinavia are happier than in other countries of the world. I doubt that.
Skandinaviassa on ajatus usein, että ammattilainen tukee kursokia, mutta siteet muuhun yhteisöön ovat pienet.
In Scandinavia, it's usually thought that the support person or the services support the deafblind person, but the relations with the larger community are fewer.
Mutta tähän kysymykseen, että onko jokin maa, missä ihmiset asettuvat hyvin, niin valitettavasti en ajattele, että Pohjoismaat ovat paratiisi.
But to give you a straightforward answer to which is the best country in the world for the deafblind, to that question I can answer that the Scandinavia is not a paradise for the deafblind. Money and human rights do not walk hand in hand.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a question about your development project in Ethiopia. One of the participants want to know a little bit about how it was funded and how it was carried out, and is there a report about that project in Ethiopia?
A meeting I participated in was 10 years ago. And I followed up the project a few years afterwards. But I have not heard anything about it for about 5 years now. And it is that way because of the funding from Finland ended. There was a report, but it's in folders that are so old that I can't really get my hands on that report anymore.
Okay, thank you very much, Riku. Many questions coming in here. One question about the conference next year and your presentation at the conference. What would you like to highlight at the conference on your topic? You have mentioned some of the things here, but what do you think is important for you to highlight regarding the convention and regarding human rights for people with disabilities?
Oikeudet monessa kohdassa ovat ihan vain julistuksia. Eli
quite generally, the rights are only declarations.
Itse enemmänkin haluan nähdä sen, että miten korsakeinen elämä voi muuttua tämän vammaissopimuksen myötä.
I would personally like to see how the CRPD affects the lives of the deafblind, and not just the declarations.
Ja sopimuksen taustaidea on, että korsakeet eivät enää ole potilaita.
The idea behind it is that the deafblind are no longer just patients, but subjects in society.
Ja tämä on minulla läpileikkaavaa puheessa nyt, ja ensi vuonna käyn joihinkin asioihin syvällisemmin ja otan joitain uusia asioita, mutta tämä potilasta subjektiksi on läpileikkaavaa.
This is the main subject in whatever I speak of, and I shall focus on some aspects of this in more detail in Tampere next year. But what I said about the deafblind person not being patient, but a subject taking actions, him or herself, is what I will mainly be focusing on.
Thank you very much. We look forward to that. Another question has to do with the topic, or takes its starting point in the topic of the conference, the knowledge and the research. So the question is, do you know of any research that has to do with the implementation of the convention for people with deafblindness? Is there any research being done either at your university or any other place in the world that you know of?
Tähän tarkkaan vastausta en tiedä.
I cannot give you an accurate answer to this question.
Koska ihmisoikeuksien ajaminen vammaisiin liittyen ja
This is because
diagnoosi ovat irrotettu toisistaan jo pitkä aika sitten.
This is because the diagnosis and the right
Ihmisoikeuksien ajaminen, joka liittyy vammaisiin,
the human rights.
on irrotettu toisistaan.
So the policy and of the diagnosis have for long been separated.
Ja tämä aiheuttaa, että on paljon tutkimuksia, miten vaikka esimerkiksi korona vaikuttaa vammaisiin. Tämä tutkimus ei käsittele, miten sokeat ihmiset kokevat koronan. Tällaisia tutkimuksia on tullut paljon.
And there's a lot of research which leave out a certain group of disabled. For example, corona research doesn't cover how coronavirus has affected the community of the blind, for example.
Thank you. And the final question I see here has also to do with the fact that you have been traveling a lot and you've visited many different countries. And it's a very concrete question. Do you know how many countries have interpreting services for deafblind people? So how many countries in the world?
I've never thought of the number in this matter.
Mutta minusta tuntuu, että todella harvassa maassa
But I have a hunch that very few countries.
kuuroille jonkinlainen palvelu
There is a service for the deaf.
lähinnä tuomioistuimissa.
It's mostly for working at agencies.
Mutta kuurosokeille oma tulkkipalvelu, se on
But
harvinaisuus.
interpreting services for the deafblind, that's a rarity globally.
Yeah, that's my impression as well. And that is also a question that that we will be able to discuss further next year in Tampere when we meet people from different parts of the world. It will be interesting. So thank you very much, Riku, for your presentation and for your answers to all the questions. We are ready for our next presentation. I have a few details that I forgot to mention earlier. One is that in addition to the 5 participants of the planning committee that you met in the video, there are 2 more participants, Estrella Björnsson from Iceland and Hans-Erik Frölander from Sweden. I forgot to mention that, sorry. Then there was a question about the conference next year and when is the deadline for submitting abstracts, and it's not before until the end of January. I think we're not quite there yet, but we will send out information about the conference, and there's plenty of time to prepare your abstracts. Now we turn our focus to technology, which is a topic that I find very, very interesting and in many ways central for the development of new assistive devices, new assistive technology for people with deafblindness. I recently read that Ray Kurzweil, who is an American technology guru, some see him as a guru, he's an inventor and futurist. He has predicted that we will see 1,000 times as much progress in this century than we did in the last century. And of course, this brings with it a lot of possibilities that we can't even predict, but it will also bring with it a lot of challenges. That is the topic of our next presentation. The speaker is Anita Schjøll-Brede, who is a global speaker on the future of technology. And I was a bit impressed when I found out that already in 2018, she was on the top 50 list of technology women in technology of the world. So we are really happy to have Anita with us today to talk about technology and disabilities in a rapidly approaching future and the present. Remember that you can submit your questions in the chat, and we will have Anita answer them at the end of her presentation. But welcome, Anita.
Thank you, and hi everyone. It is lovely to be here. Let me just get my slides set up. Hopefully you're able to see them and hear me, and if not, I assume the hosts will jump in. Good, all good. So yeah, I actually had the pleasure of studying under Ray Kurzweil a few years ago. And indeed, you know, his prediction is this kind of 1,000-fold explosion of technology. And you know, we can argue if it's 1,000-fold or a 500-fold, but we are living in this age of exponential growth of digital technology, which means technology doesn't develop little by little, and it doesn't even develop a lot by a lot. That a lot is growing. So it develops a lot, even more lot, etc. Which means that the phone that you have in your pocket today is many, many times more powerful than what brought the first human being to the moon, right? So one framework that I think is interesting to look at in this kind of crazy growth is what is often referred to as the 6 Ds of digitalization. And this is a framework from Peter Diamandis, who works closely with Ray Kurzweil. And we don't have time to go through the entire framework, but the bottom line is this. When things are digitized, which means they are in code, they're software, they become at some point, they become cheap, they become almost or entirely not physical, and most important, they become accessible to everyone, democratized. And I want to show you what this looks like in this short little video that I have here. Let me play this one. And this is kind of the desk going from the 1980s all the way to today, right? We have all these physical objects that we actually have to acquire, going till this kind of collection of digital tools that just comes with our phone for free, right? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about things demonetizing and dematerializing. And this is true for everyone. Growing up with my little sister Trina here, exemplified with, I will say, our finest moment together as cover girls in the book that you can see here. Our house was literally covered in cassettes, right? She loves music, especially ABBA, more than anything. And then obviously at some point, a natural, transition out of into digitization means cassettes were becoming obsolete. And for the past 10, 15 years, she has sworn by her MP3 player, and then she carries all of her music with her, as opposed to in these cassettes. And of course, these days, even MP3 players are under the threat of becoming obsolete. I haven't owned one for years, as I use my phone for that. But what I really want to talk about today is the idea of democratization of technology, which is a natural consequence of something becoming digital. Because we're used to a system of welfare technology where the aids that we need, for people who are deaf and blind, or for any disabilities or any, able-bodied people as well, the aids that we need are developed and offered in bulk. They are mass produced and they're brought to us by a governmental system, Hjälpmedelscentralen or others. And of course, that is wonderful that we live in societies that can do that. But there are so many opportunities beyond these bulk, one size fits all, here's your aids, you have to work with what we've got. There's so many opportunities out there. And I want to show you some of the things that are happening right now to give you a feeling for what might be possible in terms of personalized aids. And just be mindful that the following things that I'm going to show you, they are not product endorsements. They're simply some examples of really interesting things that are happening right now. So obviously, the first thing we want to start with is talking about smart devices, not just our phones, but also home assistants. So both Apple and Google now have not only English language, but also Norwegian, Danish, and Swedish on their repertoire. And then Apple cover Finnish language too, but as far as I can understand, Google does not yet in terms of their voice assistants. Apple is quite prohibitively expensive for some people, but a small Google Home device costs just a few hundred kroners. And this means that you can connect this device and you can control a lot of different things in your house. For example, you can copy a voice assistant with a smart light series, which even IKEA has smart lights these days. So that means that without the need for dexterity, without the need for good vision, without the ability to move around the room, you can turn on and off your lights, your TV, your coffee maker, and a variety of other appliances, right? So we're moving from a world where we need, the physical ability or the vision, and we're moving to a place where you can control that with your voice. And there's an abundance of things that can be voice controlled these days. And keep in mind, it's as bad as it's ever going to be. It's the worst it's ever going to be. It's only going to be better from here, these systems. And they're already quite amazing. So that's controlling things with your voice. That's not an option for everyone, right? There are also things like this one. Same types of technology, not the voice, but same types of digital connected technology, products like the Flick, and there's many other variations of this out there. But Flick is essentially a tiny button that you can make do anything. So you tell the button what will happen when it's clicked, you set that up, and so it can be turning on and off all lights. It can be sending someone a text message telling them that you're ready to leave. It can be having a standard grocery list that you can click to order and have it delivered to your door. And actually, it doesn't stop there. You can combine it with a service, for example, this one, if this, then that, which means without needing to know how to code, you can make that button, send an email, do these orders, like a variety of different things. One of these buttons costs a couple of hundred kroners. A subscription to if this, then that costs 20 kroners a month. And suddenly you have these aids that will allow you to do exactly what you need to do with a click of a button or a command of your voice. And that's pretty cool. Of course, sometimes, having some kind of aid, just sending a command or clicking a button isn't enough. We need physical aid of some sort. And one really other interesting trend, which is also enabled by digitalization, is what's called maker spaces. You can think of it as a library, but for physical things or for knowledge about how to make things. a lot of libraries today even have their own makerspace or maker corners. And anything that you can possibly imagine to make, you can make there. So for example, they'll have large 3D printers, laser engravers, vinyls, presses. And if you can dream it up and imagine a solution, well, you can go to a makerspace and have it build. And there are makerspaces exploding across Europe. And because Norway wasn't on this neat map that I found, here is a few in Oslo. Just to give you an example of these makerspaces. The question then, of course, becomes, well, what can you do at a makerspace, right? I want to show you a couple of examples of what makerspaces and those, the communities around them can achieve. So a lot of you will know my friend Karen. She has this little robot avatar called Aven, which is a physical avatar for children with long-term illnesses. So people who, kids who are stuck home in bed, they can take this avatar and they can send that one into the world and be part of life and be part of social life. What you might not know is that Karen started out at a makerspace in Oslo, where she could perfect her prototype, 3D print it, add a little computer, add a little camera, and try again and again and again until she had something she knew that would work before she could mass produce it. Without a makerspace, there would be no Aven and no isolation, as the company is called. That is, of course, I mean, once she made the product and testing it out and trying it out, well, then she had it produced, right, in a bigger factory. But then there's also products like this. Tilly, I think she's might have turned 15 by now. Tilly has no hands, and her hands are actually 3D printed. And I wanted to play this video. Hopefully it will play right and you will hear the audio.
There wasn't many prosthetics out there for kids when I was little because they couldn't manage to get the technology in their such a small sized hand. So we kind of set out on a mission to try and make bionic hands that could fit kids as well as adults, because there just really wasn't anything to help. So I've recently got this brand new pair of bionic hands from the Complete Open Bionics, and they're amazing. I love them so much. They're 3D printed and really affordable, and this is what they do. You can go into a fist, you can do a thumbs up, you can go like that and pinch like that, and then you can also do that and that.
So Tilly's hands, her arms were too small to fit the regular prosthetics, and so they are 3D printed, especially for her, at a fraction of the cost of what it cost her to get a pair of prosthetics hands from the kind of governmental aid program. And the fact is that with a little bit of imagination and fantasy, something like an Arduino board, which you can see in the hand picture here, which is essentially a tiny computer, some sensors, and a 3D printer, there are very, very few limits to what you can actually build in terms of perfectly personalized aids in the physical realm, especially where the standard mass-produced aid is not sufficient. And in all this, keep in mind that what you see here, the technologies you see, they are the worst they're ever going to be again, right? They're only going to get better from here. And they're going to become cheaper, more readily available, better, and it allows us to bypass these clunky one-size-fits-all solutions. But what I know now is that some of you will go, I don't know where to begin. I can't code. I don't fully understand this technology. I don't know how all this works. How do we do this? And fact is that a lot of you on this call today, you have the most important thing that is needed to start building these personalized, customizable aids. And that is, you understand the problem, right? Technology is worthless unless we actually understand the problem that we're solving. And kind of this, I would call it like this do-it-yourself innovation movement, we might be able to call it, makerspace movement. It's not that hard. You have the most important thing. You understand the problem. you understand the people who has the problem, or you understand yourself and your problem. And then you might be able to vocalize, well, how has it been solved or not been solved today, and why not? And once you know that, you can start imagining, okay, if a magician could solve this, what would that look like, right? And so in Tilly's case, it might be, if a magician could solve it, we would just like hit play on a machine and it would print a perfect pair of arms for me in the right size, and I could just like get a new one every time. Well, you combine that with a small computer and a 3D printer, and you have that. And once you know what a magical solution looks like, then you can find the right people, right? You can go to makerspaces and ask around, say, hey, I need someone to cut this thing for me or print this thing for me. It's a really cool project and we practically have no money for it, but it's really cool and fun. And then you're gonna find people who are excited to work with you. If it's all digital, you can organize hackathons where you get a bunch of young driven coders together to build this, piece of software that allows you to make that button do exactly what you need it to do, for example. And, use students. I mean, there is a new generation kind of growing up now that are fully digitally native and that can navigate these tools way better than anyone who's my age or older can. And once you have some people that are like, yes, we can help build this thing, we can figure this out, then you can actually build something that kind of works. And all of this technology, the cool thing about it is it doesn't have to be perfect from the start. You can play around with it, you can try and test, and over time, you'll get something that suits exactly the needs you have, whether it's a one-click button to buy groceries and have them delivered to the door, or a one-click button to communicate a message, or using your voice to send an email, to whatever it is that you or the person you're helping needs. And then there is, of course, a big question in all this. And as you can tell, I'm a technology enthusiast, right? I thoroughly believe that the technological revolution we're seeing now is for the good of humanity and is very exciting. But there is still a question worth asking, which is technology all good? Can technology solve any problem in the world? And I think of it like this. The first time a human being picked up a rock, that human being had a choice, right? You could use that rock, this tool, this piece of technology, which really is, it really is, or it becomes, you can use it to crack a nut open and share the food with your friends, or you could use it to hit your rival in the head and win the territory or the partner or whatever it is that you win. Technology is just a tool, and it's how we use it that matters. And in the same spirit, when Apple or Google sends a required product update to the home system, and suddenly the app or the voice command or the button that you had finally mastered, that suddenly changes, well, that becomes a problem, especially when it happens like every 3 months. And when we think that a piece of technology itself has totally solved a problem, and let's say we label someone with a cochlear implant as hearing without even further thinking about it, again, it might become a problem, right? It's our relationship with the technology and how we apply the technology that can cause issues. So when we apply technology, no matter how complex or simple it is, we need to bring our hearts into it. We need to bring our combined knowledge and empathy into it. And we have such a magnificent range of tools at our disposal in this world. So let's make sure that we use them where they really matter. And with that, I actually have 3 minutes extra for Q&A. So I'll wrap up there and happy to answer all of your questions.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Anita. I found that very interesting. There are a couple of questions that are focusing on a little bit the same topic. One is if there are so many possibilities, why hasn't it happened yet? And also maybe in connection to that, because you also know the field of deafblindness, you know the field of technology. Is there a sort of a discrepancy, or is there something in, for instance, in the field of deafblindness, in the tradition of working in the field of deafblindness, that might be an obstacle for taking advantage of technology?
Yeah, so so everything I showed in terms of examples, like the flick button and the home assistants and lightning, all of that is already out there, right? There's nothing magical about it. I control all the lights in my house with my voice. I can turn on my TV with my voice. I turn on and off the aquarium lights with my, it's already there, right? So that's the first part of the answer. Then it becomes like, why doesn't everyone have it? Well, not everyone wants it, of course, but there's also something to point one, knowing that these things exist. Point two, being willing to try and fail. Because my voice assistant fails on a regular basis, right? My Wi-Fi connection goes down. Like there has to be this willingness and ability to experiment, right? And try and be willing to fail. I will say, and I have my sister, and so I know both her and a variety of her deaf and blind friends, both, so like I have a good sample selection, but I don't work in the field per se. My mom works in the field, but I think there is a certain, and I don't know if this, if this is true for the field of deafblindness, but I see it sometimes with my sister and her friends. Like we had a group that we would go up into the mountains together in Sömodalen at Jonsgård Tourist Center. I'm sure some of you will be familiar with that. And this was this, I can't remember what we called it back then, if it's changed name, but this like wilderness week for people, young people with deafblindness. And we had this principle of like, we should be a group of young people that do fun things together. And we shouldn't really care that some of us are deaf and blind. That was the starting point, right? So we went on hikes. We never followed the trail. My little brother was part of it. And he's like, hey, we have like a surfboard and a boat. Let's do like, let's invent a new form of like water skiing. And we kind of just used the tools we had at our disposal, sometimes technological, sometimes just humans. And we went, let's not care that some of us can't see or hear. Let's just go have fun. And so I think there's something to that attitude that I don't know if that always exists with everyone who's worked in the field for a long time. I think you have to have this like stupid curiosity. I think that can be learned, right? It's not an age thing. It's an attitude thing. So I think, and I hope I'm not stepping on anyone's toes in any way, because that's not my intent, but the tools are already out there. And so how can we be curious to go, okay, so I have this person that has this problem. Okay, let's think back to this talk I gave today. There must be something, right? What are tools we could use? Like, how can the person control something? Is it a button? Is it voice? Is it gestures, right? How can this person interact with physical or audio or even, there'movement? And then go, okay, so that's how they would interact. What does this person need to do? And then you kind of, and there's the challenging part is that there is no right or wrong. There's just a bunch of opportunities. But again, if you're able to describe the problem, you are likely to find some piece of technology that will help. And obviously there's more advanced technology like cochlear implants. It's not something you can just like 3D print, right? There are some things that are more complex to develop. So now I'm talking a lot about those smaller aids in everyday life that makes life easier. But then there's also, the final thing I maybe want to say is that there's also a lot of cool things that are coming in the future. And I didn't have time to talk about that today, but for example, I have some friends of mine and the technology is still a few years out, but they're working on tactile video conferencing, I think, is the best way to describe it. So imagine the ability to sign tactilely. No, how do you say that in English? To do tactile sign language in thin air, but actually feel it. You know, things like that. That's also not something you just 3D print, but that's also coming. And yeah, so a lot of the tech is already there, requires curiosity and a willingness to try. And there's a lot of more cool things coming out. That was a long.
I'm sure there are, and as you said, with the pace or speed of technology development, a lot more will have happened when we meet in Tampere next year. There's a question here from Scotland. First of all, great presentation. He says, have you got any plans happening with technology for deafblind people, like for instance, artificial intelligence?
So unfortunately, I don't have the pleasure of working in the intersection between the two fields right now. My company, what we deal with is scientific research. So if there's anyone here that you know, need to navigate research papers better, we have tools for that, and that can, to a very small degree, intersect with deafblindness. Unfortunately, I'm not currently in a position where I get to work with that.
And another question is, technology is often regarded as something distant or cold. What would you say to people who claim that that is the case?
It's a good question, right? Would you like a robot nurse or a human nurse? And I think, first of all, I think it's never quite that easy. I think that, and it comes back to what I said, right? That it depends how we deploy technology. If we think, take the cochlear implant as an example, if we think that just like implementing technology means we have solved the problem, thank you, I can go home now, we might not, you know, we might not be using the technology in the right way. If we say this is a piece of technology, we're gonna, you know, implement that, put that in place, and then we're gonna see what you need from a human perspective together with that. That's where the winning territory is, where there's the tech solving some of the problem and the human being part of it. And the more, you know, I would rather have my diagnosis set by a robot doctor sometime very soon. They're not fully implemented yet, but these systems that can look at a X-ray of your lungs and see if you might have cancer or whatever it is. The robots, machine learning, AI is much better at that than humans. I would much rather have a robot, you know, scan my lungs and tell me whether I might have cancer. I still want a human doctor or nurse to tell me. I want someone to talk to. I want a human. And that's how I think kind of technology and humanness goes hand in hand, right? Technology is never a replacement for a human. We have to kind of work together to make sure that that we as humans can be more human, that we can human better, if that's a verb, together with the technology.
Great, thanks. And finally, I have a question from myself, because today during this webinar, we've heard about research in psychology and teaching and so on that Paul was talking about. We've heard about declarations, human rights declarations, and we've heard about technology. Now, if we think what will improve the life of people with deafblindness the most of these three things, where would you put your money?
In the combination. Like, I think there's this like silly saying that like everything is connected to everything, but for me, that is very true. Like, you can't have one without the other. Technology are just tools. We have to have, you know, human rights discussions in order to, like, it doesn't, you can't just pick one.
Thank you. I think that's a really great answer to sum up the presentations of today, because I think we are running out of time now, and we're running out of questions. We went through the questions here and the comments. So thank you very much, Anita. I really personally enjoyed this very much, as I enjoyed the other presentations, and I'm sure that a lot of us will be present and will be wanting to discuss this with you when we meet in Finland a year from now. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And now we are closing. We're getting close to the end of our webinar, but we have a small greeting from Finland, from the hosts of the conference next year, and Risto Hoikanen, who is also part of the planning committee, is also a member of the local planning committee in Finland, and I welcome you now, Risto, to tell us a little bit about next year's conference.
Thanks, Ole. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, Risto Hoikkanen, Operation Manager of Deafblind Association is speaking. Deafblind Association has long history, 50 years active working for deafblind people, independent living and an equal member of society. Work will continue, as Riku said, a lot of to do. I'm proud to announce one of the most important conference 2022 in deafblindness field. On September 2022, you are welcome to Finland, city of Tampere. Conference place is Tampere House, just middle of Tampere. All important places are near, only couple of steps and you are in. A lot of individual meetings, important information and a lot of shared information, experience. You are one of the key people. Please catch up this conference and meet tomorrow's knowledge. I promise you're surprised. Welcome. Thank you.
The city of Tampere is located in the middle of the Finnish Lakeland area. Tampere is a fast-growing and developing city. Tampere has a profile as an industrial city, but it has many green areas and is surrounded by waters and nature. The center of the city is built around the Tammerkoski Rapids. Observation towers and high buildings are typical to the landscape. The university and the business life give an international touch to Tampere. Cultural events such as theater and concerts are part of the city life. Due to its location, you always get fresh fish from the nearby lakes. The local specialty is black sausage. You either like it or not. The Finnish people love sports. Also, the deafblind people take part in sports activities. The headquarters and the operations center of the Finnish Deafblind Association are situated in the suburb Hervanta in Tampere. The residents and clients of our center can communicate in sign language or tactiles in their everyday life.
Saadaan tämä tilanne sillä lailla rauhoittua ja ajan kanssa katsottua niitä kuntoon.
They can take part in different activities, play chess, and enjoy our garden. Our center is used as a location for events concerning deafblindness, such as the European Deafblind Day 2019. The slogan of the Finnish Deafblind Association is individual contacts face to face. Welcome to Tampere in 2022.
So on behalf of the planning committee, we hope to see you all next year in Tampere. Thank you for being part of this webinar today. Bye-bye.